It's called Study in Dialect, and it's called Study in Dialect because it's a book about dialect, but it's actually mainly about scholars, people who've studied dialect down the centuries, why they've done that, and how they've done that. It focuses on dialects of English across the world. There is some other material in there on some other languages where the work on those languages has been influential with regard to the work on English. But yes, it's English dialect. The book was commissioned as part of a series called Perspectives on the English Language. So that was the starting point, that it was the part of the second wave of books in this series published by Palgrave. They wanted a book that was going to be aimed at second year students, final year students, MA students. So that was the primary audience, and it was to be a textbook. So I suppose the overriding aims are it's got to have a lot of facts, and the facts have got to be accurate. And then the textbooks that I like myself are textbooks that you want to read. So the other overriding aim was to make it readable. So it's combining a lot of information for students who already know a little bit about linguistics, maybe a little bit about dialect study, but who want to take that further, who want an overview of the whole history of dialect study, but in a readable format. Those were the overriding aims, I think. It can be used in class in that there's a lot of material in there that's useful if you're a teacher or if you're a student. It doesn't have exercises. It's not a course book that's to be used from which you can construct classes. But it's designed to be really a kind of backbone to a course, so that you have all the essential information in there on why people have studied English dialect down the centuries from start up until present day. And it also provides ideas about the kind of work that students could do in their essays or projects or even dissertations. And it gives you guidance to all the resources that are now available, paper resources or electronic resources. So it's really designed to give anybody doing a course in dialect study or a course where dialect study features the essential information. I've done a couple now. I think by the time I did an earlier one called Study in the English Language, which has gone into 2 editions. I think by the time I did the second edition, I knew what I was doing by that time, but it took a while to learn how to do that kind of textbook. For me, I think, well, going back to the previous answer, if you're providing essential information, it has to be provided in a readable format. And what I try to do, or what I've tried to do in both books, is divide the information up into manageable chunks, I suppose, chapters, and to give each chapter a narrative, a story, which then, once you've read all the chapters, you have a bigger story. So I think perhaps the main thing about a successful textbook is one that has a story or a series of stories in it. There does seem to be a lot of general interest in English dialect and what we think of them. And the book really tells the story of why people have been interested in dialects down the centuries, the range of different reasons they've had for looking at dialect. And that includes not just, let's say, academic scholars, but actually everybody who's done work, from little glossaries to bigger pieces of work, anybody who's done work investigating the nature and the origins of English dialect. So I hope it will have an appeal beyond the classroom, yeah. I think we're fascinated by dialect because it's a kind of mixture of the familiar and the strange, in that to take English, we're all English speakers, and so that's very familiar to us. But when we hear somebody else speaking our language in a different way, it's quite a peculiar experience. It's like we recognize stuff and we don't recognize stuff, and yet it's the same language, but it's not the same language. So I think that's at maybe at the heart of the fascination with dialectal variation. When you start to look at the work that's been done, there's been quite a range of reasons. I mean, the earliest scholars were interested in compiling dictionaries and glossaries, looking at the vocabulary of English at a time when there was no established division between standard English and non-standard English. People didn't know which words were local and which were used more widely. And so the early scholars were basically involved in setting up the whole distinction between general or local or standard or non-standard English. Then there's always been an interest in simply recording dialectal forms, because there's always a sense, whether it's true or not is another matter, but there's always a sense that language is changing quickly, or that dialects might be dying out, and that it's an urgent matter to try and record the information before things change too much. And I suppose on a more abstract theoretical level, a lot of the scholars, certainly from the end of the 19th century down to the present day, a lot of the scholars who've been involved in dialect study have been interested in how language changes over time, in describing that process and working out theories that explain how it happens and why it happens. So linguistic change, that theme has been pretty important in dialect study as well. I was an undergraduate in Swansea's English department decades ago, which is where I was introduced to linguistics and dialectology by a person who turned out to be my PhD supervisor, David Parry, who worked here for about 30 years, and he set up a survey called the Survey of Anglo-Welsh Dialects, which was an investigation into how English is spoken in Wales. Because of his interests, and because he wanted to do for English in Wales what had already been done for English in England, to do a survey that would complement the kind of work that had been done in England. He was always very modest about his work, but it's acquired quite a lot of fame. It's quite important work, and it certainly contributed to the study of English worldwide, I would say, as an example of work into a particular variety of English and its sub-varieties, and what happens to English when it comes into contact with other languages, which it has done all over the world now. And that's part of this subject as well. When I started the book, I thought I knew the material, because I've been teaching on varieties of English for about 30 years now. Having started the book, it was partly a process of gradually realizing everything that I didn't know about the subject. So it's partly about, from my own point of view, of exploring the subject, getting feedback from specialist readers on areas that weren't included in drafts and could be included. So one challenge was just to get to know the area better myself. By reading online, by visiting rare books collections. The biggest challenge is then actually writing it, because no matter how much I've tried, I've never been able to write quickly, and it's kind of inch by inch every day. Maybe a good day you get a good paragraph done, and in the end the book is 140,000 words, and all the time that you're writing it, you can't believe you're going to get to the end of it, and then suddenly you've got all these words. But the actual daily process involves sitting down and trying to write some good sentences with some good information in them that flow on one into the other. And always been interested in the process of writing and listening to writers talking about writing, and I've heard many writers talking about how they need to do many drafts before they're happy with the end product. And I thought, I don't think I can do that. But in practice, that is what the way it was done, is working over and over the smaller sections and then bigger sections until eventually it all fits together. And then you feel it's worthwhile, even though the process feels like torture sometimes. Ultimately, the book comes out of courses that I've been teaching for a number of years. So as those courses were changing, the book itself was changing. And then as the book was developing, my teaching was changing. So that was happening as well. But also, I did want, as I say, this overall story to emerge. And the book is arranged thematically, but also chronologically. I've tried to ensure that the two go together. So it moves from work on dictionaries to atlases to more modern sociolinguistic and geolinguistic work. And those are the main themes. And luckily, that's also the chronological development of dialect study. But exactly where stuff was placed in which chapter did change a lot during the process of writing. And I wanted a neat number of chapters as well, so it ended up with 10 chapters in the end. But that wasn't necessarily the original plan. But I think this is what happens, whether you're an academic author or a student doing a dissertation or working on a project. Part of the process involves changing the structure of the project as you're going along, as you're finding out stuff.